Lord, we thank you for this time that we can dedicate to you to study of your word and think deeply about it and worldview implications of what it means for us to not only believe it, but live as though we believe it. Lord, so we ask that you would guide and direct our conversation today as we finish up the sixth commandment and move on to the seventh and eighth. We thank you and we praise you in all of these things, and we lift them up to you in your name. Amen. There we go. All right, so we are picking back up our discussion with the sixth commandment. I want to just go ahead and read the text for us, as we have done each and every time, read the entirety of the 10 commandments. And hopefully tonight, we will be able to get through commandment number 8, finish up some worldview questions as it pertains to commandment 6, and then move into commandment 7 and 8 tonight. So as we open up, we're going to read Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, and we're going to read verse 1 through verse 17. So would somebody be willing to read verses 1 through 6, and then someone else pick up in 7 through 11, and then someone else 12 through 17?
I'll take 1 through 6.
All right, 1 through 6 is called, and then somebody else can just pick up when he leaves off. 7 through 11.
Okay. And God spoke all these things, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to the thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Okay.
You shall not.
7 through 11.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, their men servants, nor their maidservants, nor their cattle, nor their stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Okay, and someone pick up and read 12 through 17.
Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Okay, awesome. So this is our context. We're talking through the 10 words of God that he has given to Moses on tablets to bring down and instruct the people as they are learning about the commandments of the Lord. And then now we are in commandment 6. We have discussed commandment 6, and I want to move into some more application-based and worldview implication questions as we kind of digest what the sixth commandment is and what it means. But first, what I want to do is look at what Jesus says about it in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. So if you have your Bibles, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 5, just so that we can kind of get a running start at this. We're going to read from chapter 5, verses 21 to 26 to kind of see what Jesus' interpretation of the fifth command, or excuse me, of the sixth commandment as we have it here. So again, starting in verses 21 and going through 26, I'll read that for us. You've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. All right, so if someone were to summarize what we think Jesus is saying here in his taking of the sixth commandment and not reinterpreting it, but giving new meaning to it, or maybe adding a layer of meaning to it, what would we say that he is doing? What is he instructing here in verses 21 to 26?
If you show anger toward another person, it is just as bad. If you have a bad, I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right. So if you have anger or malice in your heart toward another, right, it is as if you have murdered that person. Everyone who is angry, this is where the language comes in with judgment, right? This is what he's talking about here. And again, remember the whole context of the Sermon on the Mount. I don't want to preach an entire sermon or sermonette on the Sermon on the Mount here, but the whole point of what Jesus is getting at is that the righteousness of you who expect heaven is to exceed that of the Pharisees. And then he rolls into all these things, showing us that we could never possibly exceed those standards, and really even showing the hypocrisy of the standards that have been shown by the Pharisees themselves, because that while they may follow the letter of the law, namely they haven't murdered someone, they certainly have held contempt and anger towards someone in their heart, which is the exact point that Jesus is making here. So the Pharisees and their mentality or their attitude is what is in purview here. And so Jesus is not necessarily redefining the law as much as he is enlightening its true meaning. And I think Laura said it pretty well, that this hatred that one feels in one's heart towards someone is as if they have murdered them. And you get this kind of language in verse 21. He says, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. Now, obviously, the first part of that is our commandment, that you shall not murder. The second part is the byproduct of murder, and that is the punishment that it carried, which we know in the Old Testament to be what? Death, right? You murder, so shall you be murdered. This idea that we looked at in Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. You shed man's blood, and by man, so your blood shall be shed. And so Jesus is pointing directly at the cause of it, and then the judgment for it. And then he says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. And so he's kind of amping up that which the commandment is even saying, right? Not only will they be put to death, but rather they will be eternally in peril.
Yeah, it's also reemphasizing something that the psalmist said, which is God doesn't desire sacrifices, but a pure heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just reemphasizes that point in a very, very, actually almost hyperbolic way.
Yeah. And so it's almost as if he's saying hatred accomplishes the same thing eternally that murder accomplishes temporally. And what I mean by that is hatred can send you to eternity separated from God, and murdering in the flesh temporally on this celestial ball will cause for temporal judgment, namely the ending of your life here in temporal world, if you will. And so there's just a very interesting dialogue that's going on here. And I can't leave it but say that what is the remedy of that? And Jesus says, hey, if you're going to worship me, you need to go or if you're going to worship in the temple with offerings and gifts, you need to make sure that you go and reconcile first to your brother so that you have none of this malice and hatred in your heart. So you come before the Lord with this clean heart that is required, this contriteness toward the Lord. And so again, the reason I wanted to go there to start our discussion is because of its connection with the sixth commandment itself. In Jesus' kind of highlighting of this commandment, he is instructing that it was never really solely about whether you murdered or not, And we see that in the intent of the commandment itself that we looked at last time, right? We saw that this commandment is not just kill, but rather murder, namely have hatred in one's heart and act upon that hatred to take one's life. That's kind of the definition that we gave to the commandment, the act of killing someone who is innocent and with hatred or malice in one's heart is kind of the conclusion that we drew from our word study of how this is used. The word that's used in the sixth commandment is used elsewhere in the Old Testament. And so we need to be careful of how we think about the sixth commandment. Not only, we don't just do what the Pharisees do and just kind of dangle, well, I haven't killed anybody in front of it. We need to also make sure that we are ensuring that we are actually being pure and clean of heart, contrite and humble before the Lord, and confessing that sin to him. So with that, I want to pause for just a second. Any questions about the correlation between these two, or any input or content or anything that you wanted to add to the discussion? Sweet. Everybody's got it. We're good. Again, that was a very cursory read of Jesus's commandment. We could go deeper and go longer on that if we wanted to. But I just wanted to make sure that we touched on it as it relates to the sixth commandment, because I believe very firmly that Jesus is highlighting something that is already in the text of the commandment number 6. I think he's highlighting the meaning of what causes the destructive act of murder. And so I think Jesus, more so than any of us can think about or can contemplate, knows and understands the human heart and the human condition and the corrosiveness that is sin. And it gives way to this type of act that is prohibited in the sixth commandment. So now I want to move into, now that we've cleared up all of those intertextual and intertestamental questions, I want to move to a couple of application things. We talked about the first one a little bit at the end of last time, but I wanted to make sure we hit it again, because it's this, how we think of the sixth commandment shapes our worldview. And if you don't know what a worldview is, it's the way in which you look at the world around you, the way that we understand how we are to react to that world. And it is informed in part by our Christian faith. And so how we think about even modern things, such as, for instance, the death penalty, right? And should Christians support it? Again, we talked about this one last time, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. But we see very clearly in Numbers 35, which is one of the texts that we looked at to understand the commandment, the sixth commandment, that this is not to allow some vigilante justice, but rather allow God's law to be that which rules. And we see that has been passed to governing authorities based upon Romans 13:4. So again, I don't want to rehash the whole death penalty. Should we support it, or is it okay for Christians to support it? I would come down on the argument that it certainly is permissible and maybe even preferable for Christians to support some form of the death penalty. I would highly nuance this, though, and this is where we get into some new material that we didn't cover last time. The nuance that I would give is probably the Old Testament nuance to the death penalty. Now, you may ask, well, what is that? It is the requirement of 2 or 3 witnesses to be eyes on that action that took place, not based upon evidence or anything, but 2 eyewitnesses that saw the act took place, and then the death penalty could be enacted. And so I would probably come and bring that to bear. Again, this is just Adam speaking of what I think the biblical text is doing. It's putting up guardrails to active misjudgment for the purposes of killing another out of maltreatment of justice. And so I would possibly advocate for some form of those type of guardrails, even in the modern understanding of the capital punishment laws. And we have a good deal of that. We have the modern equivalent of this 2 eyewitness system would be, proving to a jury beyond reasonable doubt, right? So I mean, you have to prove and demonstrate very clearly, without reasonable doubt, to 12 people that this person committed this act that is deserving of the death penalty. And so I would definitely advocate for high guardrails around what we call capital punishment. And this is how I would nuance that discussion. And I think it's biblically grounded in that they weren't just like, oh, you think he killed him? Well, you're dead then. Well, they had to go through a judicial system by which they sought, was there any eyewitnesses to this event? And if not, then they needed to create some other form of justice in that time period. Does that make sense to everyone? And any questions about that? Any other thoughts about that? Because again, I'm not the end all be all of this stuff.
I disagree with every word of that.
You do? Okay, awesome.
Just kidding. I don't at all.
Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Keeping us on our toes.
I'm just going to nickname you Troll on the Zoom account.
Yeah, he signed in as you, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
Last time.
Yeah. That one was an accident. Okay.
No. So any other thoughts? Any questions about that? Again, it's just a nuanced view of what the death penalty is, how it should be enacted, even in modern day. I think that there needs to be guardrails around the enacting of it. If we're going to be ethically consistent as to how it is applied, it's not just a he said, she said that he killed him, so therefore you die type thing. There's got to be some discovery in this execution of justice.
I mean, I would definitely say that there's certainly an argument out there. I don't personally believe this, but it's definitely say there's an argument out there for avoiding death penalty entirely because of the chance of getting wrong and leaving in God's hands and just trusting Him with it.
Right.
You see that in a lot of communities like the Mennonites and the Amish. But at the same time, I don't think the Bible would say that is 100% what it's advocating. I think it's rather them being extra cautious to the text.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are differing viewpoints on this idea of should we support, as Christians, believers in the gospel, should we support the death penalty or not? And so all that I'm seeking to present to you is a biblical case by which we could support the death penalty based in the biblical text. Now, whether or not one's conscience can continue to allow them to support the death penalty, that would be upon each individual. I would just say that there is a healthy amount of biblical material to support the presence of and continuance of the death penalty. Romans 13:4 would be one in which I would point to, where it says that the government wields the power of the sword, both in war, wields the power of the sword, and then what that is meaning is both in warfare and in the execution of extremely heinous cases. So that authority that God once had in His theocracy has been pushed down to the governments which God has established upon the earth. Now, do governments get it wrong? Yes. Do governments do bad things? Yes, they do. But that does not mean that the death penalty, as it is stated in the Old Testament, is therefore annulled, because the New Testament never does such thing. And so I think that we need to think rightly about it. And our Christian worldview, both Old and New Testament, as we come to bear on the biblical text, should inform our decision as to what legislations we support, those types of questions, both at the local level and at the national level as well. So, okay. Any other thoughts on that? If not, we'll move on.
Let's talk about adultery.
Woo!
Well, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. There's two more things that we cannot get away from when we discuss this particular thing. And the second one
Oh, I thought we already talked about that.
is, how does this command influence our thoughts on abortion? So I'm going to go ahead and just stop talking for a second. Let's let some dialogue happen as it pertains to how the sixth commandment, what does it say? What does it change? Does it shape our worldview at all concerning this hot button issue in our culture of abortion. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think it might like help, if you can convince a person who's a Christian that the child is a life, is a living being, and that, well, I never mind. I recant what I was.
I mean, I think this all comes down to whether or not the child is actually viewed as a child or as a grouping of self inside of the mother's body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of where it comes down.
But yeah, the reason I stopped is because I don't know, I thought this is what's the point? What do you mean influence our thoughts on abortion, right? Because I think
Because it's everything.
because I think abortion is wrong. Are we arguing then should the person who performs the abortion, should they have the death penalty for killing another human being, or is that what we're talking about? I don't
I think it's within the purview of the discussion as to how the sixth commandment, and then as we talked about the Genesis 9 passage being the theological underpinning of this command. I think that it does kind of bring to bear our thoughts on the culpability of the person performing this act of abortion. If we believe that abortion is murder, then that should reflect in our worldview as to how we think or what we think about the culpability of the person who has performed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the question that I'm putting out there. Does it inform it at all? Should it inform it? Because again,
well, because the reason why I brought that part up is because I don't know, it seems weird to ask this question if the point behind it is does this make abortion wrong or not, right? You get what I'm asking here? Because
right. Well, I mean, that's the first and primary question, is because if it is murder, right, which I think that we would all agree that it is,
yes,
then it definitely is a breaking of the sixth commandment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If it is, right, if it is murder, there's whole other camps that believe that it's not murder at all. It's just the elimination of a potential life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And so at that point, I would say to a non-Christian, I think this says kind of nothing, right? Because they're not going to view the command, do not murder, as having any sort of authority over themselves. And so even if then in the guise of under the purview of the Bible, if abortion is murder, that wouldn't really say much. But to a non-Christian, or to somebody who is a Christian, maybe it would say something to them if they're not fully persuaded on the abortion issue one way or the other.
Right, and I think that's the reason why I asked the question as to whether or not it influences or shapes our worldview pertaining to how we interact with those that are non-Christians that don't hold the same beliefs that we do. Mm-hmm. Does our understanding of the sixth commandment and its relationship to abortion change and affect how we see legislation that's passed, what types of services that we would advocate for as Christians? Again, the only reason I'm asking these questions is because there's not many points in the scripture where we get to this level of question where we can actually wrestle with how does this command influence what we believe and think in the modern world around us, and does it interact at all with what we would vote for, think is right in legislative purposes? All those types of things are informed by the worldview that we hold. And if we believe the Bible to be true, right, then all of the Bible should shape and guide what we believe or think about these issues. And so again, that's the only reason that I even offer this as a discussion point, because I want us as a church to be well informed as to what the sixth commandment is, what it is prohibiting, and the influence that it has upon what we believe about certain big issues that are really in our culture becoming commonplace. So
it's very unfortunate for the doctors if they're looking at a pregnant woman that might be having triplets or something,
Mhm.
like we know of a family that had triplets, and they said there's one baby that is not well, you
Mhm.
know, and kind of suggested, you know, they kind of push it. If
Yeah.
it looks like it's going to be on them if something goes wrong.
Right.
And that family chose, to let that baby have a chance.
Right.
And it's so sad that the doctors are the ones kind of pushing that.
Right.
And so that's so unfortunate for someone who's a non-believer, you know, if they are scared because their doctor saying this could kill you,
Right.
the baby could kill you and it could die, you know?
Yeah. No, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Just live, like real application to seeing that happening.
Yeah, and so our worldview shapes, as Christians, what we would decide to do in that particular instance. However, again, we're living in a culture in which that is increasingly not the norm, particularly even from our medical community, medical experts. There is this tendency toward this type of action, which we as Christians would hold as a murderous act. And so again, it's the question of culpability comes into play. And again, I don't want to go too much further down the rabbit trail here, but culpability as to who is responsible, who does God hold responsible as to breaking the sixth commandment if a baby is aborted, if a baby is murdered in the womb, right? I think that there are a couple of answers to that question that may be uncomfortable. That
Yeah.
Maybe and they hold the mother and the doctor, or God holds the mother and the doctor culpable on that one.
And the father.
Yeah. So I would go really far on the line of culpability. And we as Christians need to think well about this, because the Christian community has been labeled as, woman haters, trying to suppress the female autonomy because of what we believe about abortion, and we believe that it's murder, right? But I would argue that not only the doctor is culpable, but the one seeking the abortion is culpable, and the other person seeking an abortion is culpable. So that would put mother and father as culpable to the murder of this child in the eyes of the Lord. Now, this will never get to the eyes of legislation, right? We're not talking about should a mother be tried for murder or a father be tried for murder at an abortion.
There's an abortion, like End Abortion Now is advocates for that.
Right.
In Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think and those are the types of difficult, hard worldview questions that I think a commandment like this brings up. Because if we believe the commandment is as strict as we've said it is, then who is culpable and what is the punishment therefore in that culpability? And again, I not that we have to solve all the world's problems tonight. I just want to bring it up so that we as a church are well informed on where to go to have this discussion, because it is one that we need to have as Christians. It is one that we need to be sensitive to, because the reality is that the cross is grace for murderers as well. So no matter if one has sought an abortion in the past, the grace of the cross covers that.
Yeah. At the same time, I'd also argue, you look back at the time where Jesus was talking to the Pharisees after they interacted with his disciples who were picking grains, rubbing them in their hands, and eating the kernels.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus was like, in the Old Testament, David ate the bread from the altar, and that was okay. And what they're doing now is okay, because what I care about more is people, lives, and loving them, seeing them grow, and not so much on the actions. Like, the action is important, but when it comes to a question of do we hurt, harm this person because they broke a law, or do we show them grace so they can grow? I think the weight is on grace so they can grow. It doesn't mean that we take away the responsibility. It doesn't mean we excuse what they've done. We don't say that it was okay. At the same time, it's grace, growth, forgiveness is what's more important. That should have a greater weight.
Right. And then this is a point where I would probably point to a place like Paul, which points out the necessity of the law to cause realization of sin. We should never shy away from the fact that abortion is murder and it is a breaking of the sixth commandment.
And is horrible and disgusting.
Right. But there is grace that is available through the blood that is the Savior's who shed it. So
Unfortunately, even with some Christians, we have to define when life starts.
right.
And that's a whole nother sticky wicket that I don't think we got time this week to take care of, even if we stayed on through the week.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Again, like I said, the only reason I bring this up is because I want us to be a congregation that has thought deeply about these issues that we are facing nowadays, and it will become ever more increasing. I mean, my goodness, look at the most recent pick for health and human services to run that entire department for the government. He is one of the most far left extremist abortion advocates that there is in our country, I would argue. And he will push and push and push this culture of death that has continued to plague our country and many others.
Is that the one that, just so I know who you're talking about, because I'll probably look into this later on. Is that the one who Rand Paul was questioning that went viral?
No, this is Xera.
Okay.
Who was just confirmed last Thursday by the Senate by a vote of 50-49 with one Republican abstaining.
Gotcha.
It was a very party line vote because of how radical this individual's view on abortion is. The belief in partial birth abortions is prevalent within his beliefs. The ideas of closing. He has worked so hard to close crisis pregnancy centers. He's worked so hard to shut down Christian adoption care facilities. He's gone out of his way to make it to where abortion is the only route for someone who is in a troubling situation.
He's a eugenicist.
Yeah. He is again, so that's the only reason why I push us to bring this up, because over the coming years, this is going to be front and foremost, and Christians had better think well about it, about how the text of scripture from both Genesis 9, 5, and 6, Exodus 20, verse 12, verse 13, and many others in Romans 13:4 that we've talked through, how all of that plays together to help us understand what our worldview should be as it pertains to murder. And so again, that's the only reason why I bring this up, because it's so prevalent in our culture and needs to be discussed. And Christians would do well to think well about it. The last piece is something that is connected to this, and something that is actually gaining much ground in our culture and many other cultures around us. And it's the idea of euthanasia. Again, we're talking about euthanasia being physician-assisted suicide, going to a physician and saying, I don't want to live anymore, and so I need you to kill me. And so again, our worldview will be shaped about how we believe the sixth commandment brings to bear on these things. And if you think that, hey, this isn't really an issue, Canada literally just passed legislation, again, just north of us. And it seems that we're tracking along with Canada as they liberalize, so do we. Canadian legislation just passed. They've had legal euthanasia for a while, but they just passed an expansion of that, who you can now seek euthanasia for disabled people. So if someone is disabled mentally or physically, you can encourage them as a family member to go and seek
Yeah, and this is
euthanasia.
usually referred to as right to die.
Right, yeah, right to die. We've also seen nations such as Belgium and the Netherlands go down this same track, right? And this whole thing, physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia, while termed right to die, or liberty to die, as some other people call it, is normally thought of and started as an extension to terminally ill patients who are adults making these decisions, right? But if Belgium and Netherlands have taught us anything, it started there and it went to adults who were terminally ill, but then had some diagnosis that they didn't want to deal with. So they weren't terminal. It was just they were sick and they didn't want to be sick anymore. Then it extended to those who had
Alzheimer's patients.
Yeah, Alzheimer's patients or dementia. It was extended then to forms of depression, those who suffered from mental illnesses and psychiatric diagnoses of depression and anxiety. They allowed them to go to go to physicians and say, I don't want to deal with this anxiety. I don't want to deal with this depression any longer. Kill me. And this is not just older people. This is people in their 30s, in the 20s, right? That are going to these physicians to get this done. Then the last step that they most recently took, this is Belgium and Netherlands, extended it to children with disobedient or with some type of deformities and or disabilities, that they can make the decision as a adolescent to go to a physician and say, I don't want to live anymore, kill me. And so again, whether you think this is coming or not, this is coming to us. And so I want us to think about this and think well about it, because we see that this is a gross overstep of what's called human autonomy, that my body is mine, I do with it what I want. It comes from a culture of death that highlights the productivity of an individual and leads them to the demise of themselves. And so it's not really, it's not far off as it was in the 80s.
Are you lumping this in with committing suicide?
No, this is going to someone else to have them kill you because you don't want to commit suicide yourself. And so again, the whole reason why I brought up the abortion issue and this one.
I was just asking.
Yeah, the whole reason why I brought it up is because we need to think well about what the sixth commandment brings to bear on these types of discussions. Because in these other cultures that have chosen to go this way, while it started as liberty to die, it's kind of morphed into this duty to die type arena.
So what is, can you just repeat the definition of murder as it is in the sixth commandment? You shall not murder.
Intentionally or with intent, taking the life of an innocent person.
Okay. With intent.
With intent to kill.
Gotcha.
So going to intending to take someone else's life.
I mean, but doesn't the Hebrew also cover carelessness and neglect?
In some cases, and that's the Numbers 35 portion that we covered last time. So again, all these are just big applicational questions. I bring them up to our attention because I want us to think well about it and how the biblical text informs our worldview about these things. And what we believe about these things will come to bear on what we think and how we vote on legislation and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to come down to here is like we as Christians believe that human life is valuable, not just because it's human life, because it's made in God's image.
Right, exactly. And that's the Genesis 9, 5, and 6. The theological underpinning of the sixth commandment, why the commandment exists, is in part because of the Genesis 9, 5, and 6 passage. That life is inherently valuable because it is made in the image of God, and that anything that disrupts that life that has been created is nothing less than an affront against God's creative power and his sustaining power. And so again, unless there are further questions, we'll move on to commandment 7. I know that's a lot. I know there's three.
Do you have an ESV in front of you, Pastor?
Yeah.
Does it have a footnote for murder there?
Yes, the Hebrew word covers causing human death through carelessness and negligence. Yeah.
Okay, great. So is that covered in your definition of you shall not murder? Because that seemed in tension with what you were saying.
Right. And so the carelessness and neglect, I think this is Adam speaking here. In the passage that we covered last week in Numbers 35
Yeah,
is where the imports of carelessness and neglect are coming in.
yeah.
And that in that passage you see that someone might have intended to just harm, but that intent to harm ended up killing the individual.
Hmm.
And also it has in purview, I think, the ox goring.
Hmm.
So if an ox gores an individual once, then it's kind of a pass. But if it's known for goring, that's
Mhm.
carelessness and neglect of protection of life. And so
Mhm.
therefore that person who owns that ox is met with the death penalty.
Yes.
Does that make
Mhm.
sense, Jim? I don't know if I'm
Yeah, but there's
Yeah, it
also there's that safety that's created there with those cities of refuge, so that those like according to the basic of law, yeah, they deserve the death penalty because of their negligence or an accident. But there's also they can go to a city of refuge and they can live out their days. They just can never let them leave the city.
that doesn't apply to the ox goring. That person deserves to die regardless.
Okay.
Because the neglect and carelessness of caring for the human life around them was not, it was careless and neglect to allow that bull to continue what it was doing. What the cities of refuge are is if you end up accidentally killing someone, right, but with no intent to harm or intent to kill, and then what happens from that is they can then flee to a city of refuge and wait for a jury, essentially, with the justices. So, does that answer your question, Jim?
Yep, it does.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So let's continue on. Meaning of the seventh commandment. What time is it? What?
You're not gonna like it.
I'm not gonna like it.
7:27.
7:27.
We have time. Let's do it. 3 minutes.
Yeah, we definitely have time for the seventh commandment. I don't think
You have to
all of
for
us-
Adam to say
All in favor of adultery, raise your hand.
Yeah, that's no by committee here. All right.
No,
so-
none in favor. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, meaning of the seventh command. What is your understanding of the seventh command, which reads, "You shall not commit adultery"? What does it mean?
do not.
All sorts of sexual sins.
All sorts of sexual sins. Okay.
That's
Just don't.
sex
Don't
committed.
go there.
Sex that's committed outside of the confines of a marriage is not legal in God's eyes.
Okay.
I
All right.
primarily think of affairs. That's usually what I think of.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be commonplace. Thinking like the general thought of adultery would be affairs. Cheaters, right? The wonderful TV show that True Life has given us, right?
Yes.
The TV show that we didn't know we needed, but we did. No, yeah, absolutely. I think you guys are spot on here. It specifically refers to having sexual relationship with a person in violation of an existing marital covenant, right? So typically, as Christians, right? I don't know if you guys got this treatment when you were little, but a lot of people in my life treated this as a proactive way of not breaking the seventh commandment. Namely, if I were to be sexually active or fornication before my marriage, I was actually committing adultery against my future spouse. Anybody else hear that?
Oh yeah.
Have heard that?
Oh yeah.
No.
True love waits.
I've heard other people who have heard that. I haven't personally, but
Okay.
I was never told that.
You were never
All
told
my
that.
childhood.
Okay. Yeah. So that's not necessarily the purview of this commandment. This commandment is the breaking of an existing marital covenant. Now, there are other places that we could go to tell us that fornication before marriage or outside of marriage is wrong, right? Sexual relationships outside of marriage are wrong. This one is intentionally a safeguard and protection against the family. It is one that is to protect against the the flagrant sexual sin that was going on around that particular culture of Israel. In Israel, this would also include betrothal, right? So if you were betrothed to a young lady and you were sexually active outside of that, you would be said to have committed adultery. Same thing in the reverse with the young lady. Other forms of sex outside of marriage are indeed violation of God's law, but it is sex outside of marriage that this law is particularly speaking against, because of the safeguards that this is trying to place around the societal fundamental societal building blocks of a larger culture, is what the 10 Commandments are focusing on. The word at times, this word that occurs in the 7th commandment, is used as a metaphor throughout all of the prophets for idolatry. Namely, you were adulterous, you whored after other gods. That type of language is this word applied metaphorically to the hearts of the people of Israel to go after other gods and not stay true to Yahweh. So now this is an interesting question. We're not going to spend very much time on it, just to read a quote, but why this commandment and not a more general command about sexual immorality? The reason is, I think, is because marriage is a foundational building block of any society. And so it is concerned with preserving that which will have the greatest societal impact. It's not that other sexual sin is not good, is great or grand or acceptable. It's that transgressions to the marital bed result in societal breakdown. Who is an offense against? It's an offense against both spouse and God. This is why a spouse could not pardon an unfaithful spouse. This is very clear in the text. So if I was unfaithful to Laura, right, in ancient Israelite time, Laura couldn't then therefore come to me and say, but it's okay, I accept his apology, let him live. That's a no-go. I would be deserving of death, no matter what. Even if she were to pardon me, it would be something that is held in such high honor in the Israelite culture that God has established in the Old Testament, that offense or breaking this commandment resulted in the death of the offender. Obviously, still under the purview of the two-witness system. And you can go to Numbers 5, 11 through 31 and kind of see how that kind of plays itself out. So that's really all about it. The only two other places that I would point you to is the fact that this is related to the death penalty in this way. Leviticus 20, verse 10, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. So this is not somehow a she-man-woman haters club that just women who committed adultery get the death penalty. No, if you were found out as a man who committed adultery, you and the adulteress are both killed. No matter what the spouse says. No, but I love him so much, I don't want him to die. The judge would have looked at you and said, that's too bad. He shouldn't have done what he did. Because if we let him persist, then sin will remain in the camp. And we can't have that. So he's dead. Deuteronomy 22:22. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. Again, this is countless times repeated in the text and used as a metaphor for the relationship between God and his people, time and again. And so again, we would do well to think about this rightly. And then Jesus picks this up, obviously, in the passage right after the anger passage, to say it's not just adultery that's wrong, but lust. Again, this is 5:27 through 30. If you lust after a woman or a man, I would argue by extension, then you have committed adultery with them in your heart. And this is where some of the True Love Waits movement kind of comes in and says, if you do this before your marriage, you've committed adultery against the spouse that you will eventually have.
You've committed fornication of the mind.
Right. And so, again, So I think we did it. I think unless there are further questions about the seventh commandment, it's a pretty straightforward, straight cut and dry one, which you would imagine that murder would be, but it has a lot of nuances. This one does not have as many nuances because it's if you do this, you die. If you break this covenant that you've made with your spouse, it is an affront against God, and so therefore you not only have transgressed against your spouse, but also the God that you serve. Back then. Yeah. So any questions, any thoughts before we close out tonight?
And then just that,
Yeah.
I've been reading through Genesis.
Yeah.
And I just remember what Abraham and I think what Isaac both said, but their wives were their sisters. And I remember those people coming back saying, why did you tell us this? Why did you brought this?
Right. Yeah. You know what? We may pick that up next time as kind of to round out the discussion. Is what Abraham, Isaac, David, Solomon, pretty much every king of Israel, is what they did adultery? I would argue yes, but tune in next time for our fuller discussion.
You already gave it away.
Well, doesn't it say that it was?
No, it doesn't ever. It doesn't.
Well, they're not. Some of them are.
We'll come back and talk about it later.
Hey, Adam,
They're
Yep.
bad boys.
Yeah,
and there is grace there as well.
there is
Available.
grace there as well. Yes. Thank you, Charlie, for reminding us of
It's
that.
before that they are God fearing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts, comments before we close in prayer? I know the seventh commandment was a whirlwind, but we're going to circle back around to the polygamy and all of that discussion next week. Okay, awesome. Would somebody in the internet land like to close us out in prayer?
I'm driving. I would otherwise.
Okay, Jim, you want to close us?
I
Or
guess
Joanna?
that leaves me, yeah.
Joanna can close us?
Do you want to close us in prayer, Joanna?
I would love to.
All right. You can do Mary.
Dear Lord, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you so much for the discussions we had, God, just making us stop and think, like, yes, we've heard these verses a million times, but what does it actually mean in our day-to-day lives? How does it apply to us? How do we need to be living out this faith that we say we believe in? God, give us wisdom in further interpreting these verses and how to apply them, and how to teach them and talk about them with other people, and just grace our time together. In His name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you on Sunday.
Yep.
Have a good evening.
I pray that God's face would shine upon you and His countenance be with you. And until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.